Yanks.
Yeah, they did. They asked for both Garcia and Frazier. According to, I can't remember who tweeted it, I think it was a Yankees guy, but they were told no on both guys, and it's kind of not too hard to believe that now, as none of them have moved. I think the Yankees just really value those guys really high, and unfortunately for the Blue Jays, they weren't able to get any of them. I think Davy Garcia was a bit of a stretch. I doubt they were going to trade him for Stroman, but I could have seen a trade that included Frazier for Stroman, but yeah, ultimately didn't end up materializing.
Yeah, then you saw talks with Arizona for Robbie Ray and Clint Frazier dead as well.
Yeah. So anyway, now that we've got our thoughts on the biggest trade of the trade deadline for the Blue Jays, let's go on to the second biggest trade at the deadline for the Blue Jays. This happened just moments before the 4 o'clock trade deadline on Wednesday. The Blue Jays traded Joe Biagini, Aaron Sanchez, and prospect Cal Stevenson for outfielder Derek Fisher. Fisher, a guy who at one point was considered a top prospect back when he was drafted by the Astros in 2014, and he really raced along and was groomed through the pipeline really nicely. However, has yet to show any of that success at the major league level. He's had 3 cups of coffee with the Astros from 2017 to 2019, but really no extended playing time there. And Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins hoping that he could play a factor in Toronto for the Blue Jays coming in the future. But you look at the projections for Derek Fisher, he projects to be a nice left-handed bat who can play a little bit of defense, have some power, not much of an arm, decent speed, I guess. So really, if you look at his projection in terms of player comparison, sounds a lot like Teoscar Hernandez and Billy McKinney, sort of that fourth outfielder, just a sort of a roster filler kind of player, which, I mean, it's not a terrible player. I think Derek Fisher could end up being a decent player for this team and a guy that Shapiro and Ross Atkins really valued. But look at what the Blue Jays gave up. Aaron Sanchez, Joe Biagini, and Cal Stevenson, Blue Jays prospect. Was this a little too much for the Blue Jays to give up for a guy like Derek Fisher? And, we'll also have to eulogize a bit Sanchez and Biagini's time in Toronto. So what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, so at first I was kind of very disappointed. I was like, damn. I thought it was Joe Biagini for Derek Fisher at first, I'm not going to lie. I thought that was a very solid trade, but then Aaron Sanchez came into the mix, and then we had to add Cal Stevenson, and then there was reports that, the Jays are getting someone back, and then, oh boy, Ben Nicholson Smith tweeted out that Derek Fisher is the only one coming back from the Astros, and fans just exploded. So as confusing as the Derek Fisher trade looks on surface, I feel like it is defensible to an extent, because even after the Greinke trade, with all the prospects gone from the Astros, Stevenson can't crack the top 30 Astros prospects, and Biagini seems to have peaked. You can find Biagini's everywhere. I feel like he's just a regular reliever. He doesn't have great stuff, but he's serviceable. And keeping Sanchez is a considerable risk given his injury history, his decline over the past 3 seasons, and him being a free agent at the end of the year next season. I feel like the Jays could have waited till next deadline to rebuild his value, but that's still an uncertainty with him, his finger issues, his injury concerns, and him just flat out sucking this year. But he did have some nice 3 stars, which I feel that's why teams really jumped on him. And personally, I feel like he's going to thrive in the Astros, which will make Jays fans cry. But he's going to be making a lot of money through ARB next season for the Jays to handle. It's not worth the hassle. So, as much as this trade seems very underwhelming, and personally I thought it was underwhelming, it's not that underwhelming because I remember I used to look at the Astros top prospects list in 2017 during, I believe, the Liriano trade, and Derek Fisher and Kyle Tucker were right up there next to each other, and I was like, man, I wish the Jays could have had one of these players. And one thing to consider when looking at Derek Fisher's MLB stats is that while his MLB career BABIP is .288, his xBABIP is 3.364, and if he can also maintain a 10% walk rate and a K percentage in the low 20s, he could be a very solid hitter. And I feel like the Jays really love him because he can play all 3 outfield positions, as Ross Atkins mentioned in his media scrum, and he has very sneaky pop. And I got a scouting report from Astro Center, and he said he can be a very solid big leaguer. his speed, I believe it was a scoring run in the Game 5 of the ALDS. He certainly literally looked like a gazelle out there, how fast he was. And he just has amazing pop. And I feel like it was a fair trade. At first, I was sad. I thought it was very underwhelming, but as days progress, I feel like it's a fair trade.
I think you also have to diagnose what exactly the Blue Jays gave up. Aaron Sanchez, God love him, he was an excellent pitcher for this team, was an all-star, won an ERA title, but that was back in 2016. And since winning that ERA title, he really hasn't been a serviceable Major League player. I mean, not even a middle-of-the-rotation starter. He's been hurt throughout the first 2 seasons after winning that ERA title, last 2 years, I should say. Really haven't been able to see much of him on the field, and this year has just been an absolute mess, as we've reiterated every single podcast. And while he looked better in his last couple starts, this is a guy who, 3 years since winning the ERA title, has not been a Major League pitcher, caliber Major League pitcher. So I think you also got to look at that. Joe Biagini was a Rule 5 pick 3 years ago. Well, 4 years ago. I can't exactly remember when, but 3 or 4 years ago. He's a 29-year-old guy who I think we can all agree on is not going to be a starter at the big leagues at any time soon. We saw that experiment, didn't work out. And he's just a reliever with an ERA in the high 4s this season. Sorry, high 3s, close to 4. And with this group, Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, they've proven that they can find solid relievers. Daniel Hudson was on the waiver wire a day before opening day, and he ended up turning into an asset 3 months into the season. Same with Tyler Clippard last year. Same with John Axford. They've been able to find guys. Joaquin Benoit, Jason Grilly, another example. They've been really good at finding guys who can sort of come in and be positive relievers for them. That's an easy fix. I'm not really too worried about that. And Cal Stevenson, despite the fact that he has been having a pretty decent year in the minor leagues for the Blue Jays, doesn't project to be more than just a 4th outfielder who's a few years behind Derek Fisher. So I don't think the Blue Jays ultimately gave up a whole lot to get Derek Fisher, but my 2 main concerns with this trade is I feel like you have a surplus of guys like Derek Fisher, Billy McKinney, Teoscar Hernandez. They're both very similar players to him. And Aaron Sanchez, I feel that he had been pitching a little better as of late, his last couple starts. I don't see the harm in maybe throwing him out there for the rest of the year, trying to regain some value, because at the end of the day, even if he didn't rebuild his value in any sort of way and still ended up being the pitcher that he was now, I feel like you still could have gotten a Derek Fisher for him if you traded him in the winter. So I feel like that's a little questionable. I'm not particularly a huge fan of this trade, but at the same time, I think a lot of fans are overreacting to the players that these guys once were, and the reality is just that they don't have a lot of value at this moment, and I think the Blue Jays are just sick and tired of not Aaron Sanchez as a person, but the fact that he just couldn't put it together anymore and tried to get a guy that they valued in Derek Fisher.
You mentioned Aaron Sanchez as a person. Do you believe his ego maybe played a part in this, their relationship breaking up so early?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I heard there was some bit of friction between him and the front office, but not all that much. I didn't think it was that much there. I just think that he was just not much of an asset at this point, and the Blue Jays just didn't want to keep grooming him. They wanted to get at least something back for Aaron Sanchez, because you mentioned maybe his arbitration money that he's going to make next year played a role into it. I think the Blue Jays ultimately felt that he was just not worth what he was getting paid, and holding on to him for next year was really not a road that they were willing to take. But again, I feel like at the end of the year, you're already paying for him already, so might as well see what you can have and then flip him for a Derek Fisher or a guy like that at the end of the year if he doesn't regain his value. And if he does pitch a little better, maybe you get him for something a little better. That's really my only concern with this trade. And as you mentioned, I am feeling a little better about it as the days pass by.
Yeah, I believe that Jays fans, they weren't too mad at the fact that Aaron Sanchez and Joe Biagini were traded for Derek Fisher. It was that, did Cal Stevenson really have to be included?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how the negotiations went exactly. I think, from a distance, which, we're analyzing it from a distance, you don't really know how negotiations go. I think the Blue Jays ultimately, they didn't really think much of Cal Stevenson as an impact player moving forward, despite the fact that he had been playing a little better as of late. I feel that getting a guy like a Major League caliber Derek Fisher was sufficient for them. And, who knows, maybe they didn't have to throw him in there, but at the end of the day, I don't think too many Blue Jays fans will be weeping over Cal Stevenson in the future.
Yeah, me neither. Also, you said Derek Fisher. We have a lot of Derek Fishers, and I do agree, but I do feel like Derek Fisher will be better than Teoscar Hernandez and potentially Billy McKinney, even Astros reporters. I believe they were on Tim and Sid the other day, or I believe Sportsnet 590 fan, one of those shows, and he was stating how Derek Fisher has a great upside. He is 26, which is kind of older in terms of what the Jays are trying to do right now, but I feel like he could be a potential impact player for the Blue Jays. And Billy McKinney certainly is a fourth outfielder at best. Teoscar Hernandez, he can show some promise, but he certainly has his moments, and Teoscar Hernandez as a center fielder needs to end immediately. I don't believe he's a very good center fielder. He's serviceable out there, but we need a guy that can actually play center field, and that's not out of position.
Yeah, he's been a little better in the outfield this year, but center field certainly has not been his repertoire. He's still a below-average defender there. No surprise there. So, yeah, I definitely don't like the fact that having him in center field is the solution. I don't think that's the solution. But, yeah, I think a lot of fans weren't very happy with it, and I can understand why. But you also have to look into perspective. Sanchez and Biagini, while fans were sort of attached to them, while they were big players, big contributors to the Blue Jays' playoff runs, they're really not those guys anymore. And with the value that they had, it was just not worth keeping them on the roster longer than this year. So they try to get as much as they can for him. And Derek Fisher, we'll see if he turns out to be anything of substance, but I think it's similar to the Simeon Woods Richardson acquisition, a guy that the Blue Jays liked and a guy that they were willing to take a bet on. So we'll just have to see how it all plays out in the end.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and speaking of Simeon Woods Richardson, just an off-topic note, he does start for Advanced State Dunedin tonight.
Okay, so that's something to keep an eye out for. But before we talk about any more trades, which I think we got the big ones out of the way, let's talk about something that will put a smile on everyone's face, and that's Bo Bichette coming up. He got the call moments after the Marcus Stroman trade, I believe, and he's played 4 games in the big league so far, and man, he has been on fire. And despite the fact that he's faced the Orioles and the Royals, 2 obviously teams that are terrible, he's been excellent. And I don't have the stats in front of me, but I believe he's sitting north of 400, an OPS over 1,200. He's been really good, and I feel like this start, the way he started off, is sort of damaging the blows from the trade deadline. A lot of fans not happy with the deadline, but he's come up, and he's played excellent. He hit that first big league home run on Wednesday, I believe, the day of the deadline. So I feel like that's something that we got to talk about right now. Bo Bichette coming up, a guy who we've been talking about forever, for a few years now, and he's finally here and he's ready to go. Looks locked in. How have you been able to digest Bo Bichette coming up to the big leagues and immediately making an impact?
Bo Bichette is the definition of a prototypical leadoff hitter, and the Blue Jays have been lacking in that department for a long time, since the days of Ben Revere. And to see a refreshing 21-year-old kid that can play shortstop exceptionally, that can hit the cover off the baseball, it's certainly nice to see our leadoff hitter being elite again, you know? He's hitting .444 with an on-base of 500 and an OPS just over 1,200. And he certainly looked dialed in at the plate. His highlight cake, his flow, everything about him. He hits the ball hard. And it's just exciting to see the big trio with Lourdes Gurriel Jr. of Biggio, Guerrero, Bichette, and then Gurriel. It's just so exciting to see Bo Bichette out in the big leagues doing his thing. It's just going to be a lot of fun watching him play over the next few seasons.
Yeah, and the last few days have been a lot of fun in the Major League roster. We're sort of seeing the future, and that's what we wanted to see this year. This is the whole goal of this year, seeing guys that can be on the roster beyond 2019 perform, and that's been the case. Vlad has been on fire the last 2 weeks. He had 2 home runs tonight, hit another grand slam. Kevin Biggio continues to get on base and be a catalyst near the top of the order. And, of course, Bo Bichette, as we mentioned, off to a scorching hot big league start. And listen, there will be a time, could be this year, where Bo Bichette can't buy a hit. It'll happen. Happens to everyone. Happened to Vlad when he was coming up. Happened to Kevin Biggio early in the year. Lourdes Gurriel Jr. in April. There will be times, but he's got the tools. He's going to be a player, and I have a feeling we'll see his